May 8, 1945, New York Harbor. The transport ship's engines shuddered beneath General Wilhelm Ritter's boots as the fog lifted like a curtain on opening night. Salt spray clung to the deck railings. The smell of diesel and cold Atlantic air filled his lungs. For 32 days, he'd crossed an ocean as a prisoner, expecting ruins on the far shore. Instead, what materialized through the mist made him grip the railing until his knuckles whitened. The skyline rose like steel mountains. Cranes moved in perfect choreography, lifting cargo containers the size of houses. Ships lined the docks in rows so orderly they looked painted onto the horizon. Behind them, skyscrapers climbed toward clouds, their windows catching sunlight like thousands of unblinking eyes. Ritter had commanded panzer divisions across France. He'd seen Berlin's grandest boulevards before the bombs. But this was scale beyond comprehension. The city wasn't scarred, it was thriving, and in that moment, staring at a nation untouched by war's devastation, he understood with brutal clarity. Germany had been fighting a country it never truly saw. The Reich's propaganda machine had spent 6 years painting America as weak, a nation of soft civilians and racial chaos, they'd been told. A democracy too divided to fight, too decadent to win. Joseph Goebbels himself had broadcast that American industry was overrated, that their soldiers lacked discipline, that victory was inevitable because the fatherland represented order against their disorder. Every German general aboard that transport ship had believed some version of this lie. They'd studied American tactics, yes. They'd respected American firepower, certainly. But none had grasped the fundamental truth now screaming at them from that harbor. They'd been measuring weapons while ignoring the factory that built them. 63 German generals made the crossing that May. Among them were architects of the Eastern Front, veterans of North Africa, men who'd commanded armies larger than entire Allied divisions. General Hans von Schellenberg had led the defense of Caen. General Friedrich Küssin had orchestrated retreats across the Rhine with mathematical precision. Each man carried the weight of defeat differently, some with quiet dignity, others with barely concealed rage, but all shared one assumption: their captivity would mirror their crimes. They expected prison camps, hard labor, perhaps tribunals. What they found instead was something far more devastating to their worldview. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this deep dive into untold history, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these stories. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community around the world. The docking process took 2 hours. American soldiers moved with relaxed efficiency that bordered on casual, no screaming, no pageantry, just methodical competence. Stevedores unloaded crates stamped with names like General Electric and Standard Oil. Civilian workers smoked cigarettes and laughed between shifts. The air smelled of coffee roasting in nearby warehouses, of bread from bakeries operating as if war were a distant rumor. Ritter watched a woman in a yellow dress cross the street below, holding a child's hand, completely unconcerned by the arrival of enemy generals. The normalcy was obscene. Back home, Berlin's children scavenged rubble for scraps. Here, this child carried a balloon. They were loaded onto trucks with canvas covers, no blindfolds, no shackles. An American colonel introduced himself as their escort, Colonel James Mitchell, 3rd Army Intelligence. He spoke German with a Bavarian accent learned at university. "Welcome to the United States, gentlemen," he said, and the words hung in the air like a question no one knew how to answer. Welcome, as if they were visiting scholars, not captured commanders of a regime that had tried to conquer the world. The convoy rolled through Manhattan in late afternoon sun. Skyscrapers cast shadows across streets bustling with traffic. Yellow taxis honked at delivery trucks. Neon signs advertised Coca-Cola and Lucky Strike cigarettes. Shop windows displayed shoes, radios, fresh fruit piled in pyramids that seemed designed to mock European starvation. Not a single building showed bomb damage. Not one storefront was shuttered. The city's veins pumped with commerce and life, while Europe's cities lay in ash. General von Schellenberg leaned toward Ritter. "It's staged," he whispered. "They're showing us a prepared route." But 3 hours later, as the convoy moved through residential neighborhoods, the same abundance continued. Children played baseball in parks, women hung laundry on fire escapes, old men sat on stoops reading newspapers thick enough to use as weapons. This wasn't theater, this was Tuesday. At the rail depot, they were transferred to passenger cars, not cattle cars, but Pullman coaches with padded seats and windows that opened. Coffee was offered in paper cups. The gesture felt more insulting than any beating could have been. They were being treated like human beings by people who had every right to treat them as monsters. The train carried them south through landscapes that rewrote their understanding of industrial power. Freight yards stretched for miles, locomotives pulling grain cars toward destinations Ritter couldn't fathom. Factories lined the route, smoke pouring from chimneys in rhythms that spoke of 3-shift operations. In Pennsylvania, they passed steel mills that glowed orange against the twilight furnaces that had never stopped running, never faced Allied bombing, never paused to dig their workers from rubble. The numbers were incomprehensible. During the war, Germany had produced roughly 33 million barrels of oil annually. America produced over 1.8 billion. For every German tank rolling off the assembly line, America built 5. For every Messerschmitt fighter, 30 American planes took to the sky. These weren't secrets. Allied leaflets had cited the figures, but propaganda had dismissed them as exaggeration. Now, watching endless farmland pass by window after window, Ritter realized the numbers had been conservative. Fort Hunt materialized through Virginia pine forests like a peculiar oasis. Low barracks painted military grey, oak trees older than the Reich providing shade over gravel paths. Guard towers, yes, but no barbed wire visible from the entrance. No dogs, no machine gun nests. Just American soldiers in clean uniforms standing at relaxed attention, looking almost bored by the arrival of Germany's defeated elite. The camp commandant was Lieutenant Colonel Harrison Wade, a logistics officer who'd served in North Africa. He assembled the generals in a mess hall that smelled of fresh paint and coffee. His speech was brief. "You will be treated in accordance with the Geneva Conventions. Your quarters will be inspected weekly. Male privileges will be granted after security clearance. Cooperation is appreciated but not compelled. Questions?" Someone asked about interrogations. Wade smiled thinly. "Conversations," he corrected. "We prefer conversations." The quarters were Spartan, but clean. 2 men per room with real beds and cotton sheets, running water, hot and cold, a small desk, windows with glass, not bars. Ritter tested the mattress and found it firm but comfortable, better than what most German civilians slept on now. That night, lying in darkness, he listened to the sounds of American power drifting through the window. Freight trains in the distance. Church bells from a nearby town, laughter from the guard barracks. These weren't the sounds of a nation strained by war. They were the ambient noise of a country that had mobilized only a fraction of its capacity and still overwhelmed the world. The conversations began within days. American intelligence officers arrived with notebooks and polite questions. Captain Robert Hollis handled Ritter's debriefing. He was young, maybe 30, with sandy hair and a manner that suggested curiosity rather than hostility. They sat across a plain table in a room with windows. No spotlight, no threats. No. Hollis asked about logistics, how the Wehrmacht had managed supply lines across Russia's vast distances, what the breaking points had been. Ritter answered carefully at first, then with growing candor. Because Hollis listened, he asked follow-up questions that demonstrated genuine understanding. When Ritter described the collapse of fuel supplies in late 1944, Hollis nodded. "We knew," he said quietly. "We'd been tracking your refineries since '42. The intelligence war had been as one-sided as the industrial one. American codebreakers had read German communications almost from the beginning. Ultra-intercepts had revealed Wehrmacht movements, U-boat positions, even Hitler's direct orders. Meanwhile, German intelligence had fumbled in darkness, vastly overestimating Allied casualties, underestimating production capacity, completely missing the Manhattan Project until Hiroshima's flash announced it to the world. Hollis didn't gloat about this. He presented it as simple fact, the way a teacher might correct a math error. That restraint was somehow more crushing than mockery would have been. Weeks became months. The prisoners settled into routine that felt surreal in its ordinariness. Breakfast at 7, oatmeal, eggs, toast, coffee with real cream. Then lectures, agriculture, engineering, political theory. American officers taught them about crop rotation and democratic governance with the same patient thoroughness. Some generals attended out of boredom. Others, like Ritter, found themselves genuinely curious. How had a system this chaotic 50 states, constant elections, newspapers that openly criticized the government produced such devastating efficiency? The answer emerged slowly, through dozens of small observations, rather than any single revelation. Authority here didn't flow from fear. Guards gave orders in normal voices and expected obedience because the system was accepted, not because disobedience meant execution. Soldiers saluted officers out of respect for rank, not terror of punishment. When a prisoner complained about the food too bland, not enough salt, the complaint was logged and considered. The next week, salt appeared on tables. This responsiveness, this feedback loop between governed and governors, was alien to men raised in authoritarian tradition. They'd been taught that strength meant imposing will. America suggested strength could mean listening. By autumn, many of the generals were transferred to camps deeper inland. Ritter went to Alva, Oklahoma, a name that sounded like nowhere until the train delivered him to wheat fields, stretching to horizons so flat and endless they seemed designed by geometry rather than nature. The camp sat outside a town of 8,000 people. Red brick storefronts, a movie theater, churches with white steeples. On Saturdays, prisoners could see American life through the fence. Families shopping, teenagers driving cars, farmers hauling grain in trucks that dwarfed anything the Wehrmacht had fielded. The abundance was casual, thoughtless, as natural as breathing. A local newspaper ran an article about the camp's opening. The tone was matter-of-fact, almost bored. Former enemy officers to be housed at facility east of town. No rage, no calls for vengeance, just civic notation, the same tone used to announce a new highway or school board meeting. Ritter read it twice, trying to find the hidden meaning. There wasn't one. Americans seemed genuinely indifferent to the general's presence. They'd defeated Germany, captured its commanders, and now simply filed them away like completed paperwork. The war was over. Life continued. This lack of passion, this refusal to hate, was more alien than anything Ritter had encountered. Christmas 1945 arrived with unexpected gentleness. The camp guards hung paper decorations in the mess hall, crude, childish things that would have embarrassed a Reich Ministry of Culture official. After dinner, turkey with cranberry sauce, portions generous enough to shame memory, they distributed packages from humanitarian organizations. Inside each, cigarettes, writing paper, soap, and a card printed with one word in English and German. Peace. Not surrender, not victory, just peace, as if the future could be that simple. Ritter held the card and felt something crack inside his chest. He'd spent 6 years fighting for a 1,000-year Reich. America had spent 4 years fighting to return to normal. And normal, it turned out, was the more powerful vision. In January, Colonel Wade arranged a tour. A dozen generals judged cooperative were loaded into trucks and driven into Alva proper. No script, no prepared route. Just a Saturday morning in a small American town. They passed the hardware store, its windows displaying tools that hadn't been available in Germany since 1939. The drugstore with a soda fountain where teenagers sat on red vinyl stools. The grain elevator, a cathedral of commerce, where wheat poured into railroad cars bound for export. An engineer explained the process cheerfully. Feeds cattle, feeds people, feeds the world, keeps America fat and happy. Ritter stared at the golden cascade of grain and thought about Berlin's bread rations. By summer 1946, repatriation lists circulated. Most generals would return to a Germany divided and occupied, its cities reduced to rubble, its future uncertain. Some looked forward to it anyway. Home was home, even in ruins. Others dreaded it, knowing the abundance they'd witnessed here would make every shortage back home feel like a fresh wound. Ritter felt both. He wanted to see his family, to walk streets he'd known before the madness, but part of him had been changed by captivity in ways he couldn't name. He'd arrived expecting punishment and found education instead. He'd braced for hatred and encountered indifference that somehow felt like mercy. The final revelation came the week before departure. Ritter was called to Wade's office, expecting paperwork. Instead, Wade handed him a book, Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, published in 1835. "Read the chapter on associations," Wade suggested. "Might help explain what you've seen." That night, Ritter read by lamplight. Tocqueville described an America where citizens formed voluntary organizations for every purpose: churches, fire brigades, libraries, schools without waiting for government permission. Democracy's strength wasn't the state, he argued. It was the people's habit of solving problems collectively, without coercion. Ritter closed the book and stared at nothing. The Reich had tried to impose order from above. America generated order from below, and the latter, he now understood, was the more durable form of power. June 12, 1946, Norfolk, Virginia. Ritter stood on the pier where a transport ship waited to carry him home. Rain dotted his cap. Cranes swung overhead, loading cargo with the same tireless efficiency he'd witnessed a year earlier. Nothing had changed. America kept building, kept producing, kept moving forward with the casual confidence of a nation that had barely broken stride during history's largest war. An aide asked what he would remember most about captivity. Ritter thought of the skyline, the grain elevator, the woman's cookies, the guards' polite indifference. He thought of a power so secure it didn't need to crush its enemies, only wait for them to recognize their defeat. "The noise," he said finally. "I'll remember the noise of factories, trains, church bells, the sound of a country that never stopped building its future." The ship's horn blasted. Prisoners filed up the gangway, each carrying small parcels of permitted belongings and larger burdens of understanding. Through fog, the Statue of Liberty appeared one final time. Her torch caught the grey light, same as it had when they arrived. But now, Ritter saw what he'd missed then. She faced east toward Europe, as if still waiting for the continent to learn what she represented. In later years, many of these generals would serve in West Germany's reconstruction. Some advised the new Bundeswehr, restructuring it with principles they'd first glimpsed behind wire authority, answerable to civilians, officers who served rather than ruled. Others refused military service entirely, writing memoirs that tried to explain to their countrymen what they'd discovered, that Germany's defeat hadn't come from weaker armies, but from fundamentally misunderstanding what strength meant. The Reich had worshipped power. America had harnessed it, and harnessing it, turned out, required humility that dictatorship could never possess. Ritter returned to a Germany split between occupation zones, where former allies now glared at each other across new battle lines. He settled in a village outside Munich, working as a translator. When journalists asked about his American captivity, he spoke carefully. "They showed us abundance without arrogance," he'd say. "Authority restrained by choice rather than fear. It was the first time I understood that the loudest strength doesn't need to shout." The words never felt adequate. How could he explain that his prison had been more free than his service? that the enemy had taught him more about honor than his own officers. That defeat had arrived not with bombs, but with kindness, and kindness had proven the more devastating weapon. The war ended in different moments for different men. For some, it was Berlin's fall. For others, Hiroshima's flash. For Wilhelm Ritter, it ended on a May morning in New York Harbor, watching a city rise from fog, like evidence of a future Germany had tried to bomb into submission, but couldn't even scratch. In that moment, staring at American power made visible, he'd understood. They hadn't been fighting an army. They'd been fighting a civilization. And civilization, patient and productive, always wins eventually. The legacy of those captured generals would ripple through decades. Their testimony helped shape how Germany rebuilt itself, not as a revival of military tradition, but as a democracy that looked west rather than east for its model. The lessons learned in American camps, that authority could be questioned, that government could be limited, that power grew from consent rather than coercion, became foundations of a new German state. It was an irony history specialized in the defeated teaching the victors' values to their own children because those values had proven themselves in the only laboratory that mattered. The battlefield, the factory, the voting booth, the quiet street where a woman baked cookies for strangers because that's what civilization looked like when it didn't need walls to defend itself.